Some people are just born mediocre, Miss Rodriguez, and no amount of ambition changes that. That is what Dr. Hargrove said 17 minutes before Katie Rodriguez performed a field-grade wound closure that would expose 15 years of secrets. He had no idea that the composed young nurse arriving at Valley Memorial's ICU that Tuesday morning wasn't just another entry-level RN trying to climb the hospital hierarchy. She was Senior Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez, 240 combat deployments, 3 Bronze Stars, and she was there because the Pentagon didn't send you to monitor a comatose veteran's medical records unless something had already gone very, very wrong. Valley Memorial's ICU smells like industrial antiseptic and burnt coffee, the kind that's been heating on the ward station coffee maker since 4 a.m. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead with that particular hum that sounds like electricity pretending it's alive. Katie walks through the double doors at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, her scrubs still carrying the crisp fold of the package, her badge clipped to the front pocket with the kind of precision that comes from 2 decades of uniform discipline. She carries a canvas tote in one hand, inside it, her personal stethoscope, a small framed photo she'll never display, and wrapped in a surgical towel, trauma shears with her call sign engraved along the handle. The shears are old. They've closed more wounds than most surgeons see in a lifetime. They stay in her locker. Always. The day shift supervisor, Maria Chen, walks her through the unit. "You'll be on room 347 primarily," Maria says, clicking through the electronic med chart on a computer terminal. Patient name is James Vance. 26 years old, admitted 8 months ago from Bagram medical evacuation. His stable but Maria hesitates, a tell that Katie's learned to recognize in her first 15 minutes. Hesitation means there's something the charts don't explain. He hasn't spoken since arrival. Not a word. His father is a Coast Guard commander, very decorated, visits every other day. Be respectful with that family. Katie nods. Just a nod. No questions. The best cover is a woman who doesn't ask questions. Room 347 is at the east end of the corridor, and Katie notices the soft beeping of the monitor from 20 feet away, a steady rhythm, O2 sat holding at 96%, heart rate 68, sinus rhythm. Normal. Stable. The kind of patient who should have woken up by now. James Vance lies in the hospital bed with his eyes open, looking at something on the ceiling that isn't there, his right arm positioned at his side with the careful precision of hospital positioning. His left shoulder bears the pale scarring of shrapnel wounds. Katie recognizes the pattern instantly, the way the scars cluster in a specific trajectory that only comes from one type of explosive. IED. Vehicle-borne. Probably a VB IED detonation, 30 meters out. The kind that kills everyone in the vehicle except the one person who gets pulled out by someone with the right training at exactly the right moment. Katie's hands move through the morning vital check with unusual efficiency, blood pressure, respiration, temperature, pupils reactive and equal. Her movements are economical, each gesture placed exactly where it needs to be, no wasted motion. Someone watching would see a nurse doing her job. Someone trained would see a combat medic running a field assessment. She adjusts his full line, checks the dressing on his shoulder where the surgical team closed the shrapnel wounds, and notes that the closure technique is competent but not exceptional. Standard military field hospital work. 8 months of perfect healing, and whatever happened to James Vance's voice happened long before his body recovered. He's a good patient. Maria has appeared in the doorway. No behavioral issues, stable vitals, just, she pauses again. The father is protective. Very protective. The boy's been through something, and the family knows it's more than physical, but nobody wants to say it out loud. Katie is already pulling fresh sheets from the supply cart, moving with the kind of quiet purpose that makes other nurses feel slightly inadequate without quite knowing why. "I'll get him comfortable," she says. "Is there a family communication protocol, or just be professional? Be consistent." The commander appreciates consistency. Maria leaves before Katie can ask what that means, and Katie is alone with James Vance and the soft percussion of monitors and the distant sound of a code blue announcement somewhere 2 floors down, urgent voices moving toward crisis while Katie stands in the quiet of room 347, folding a fitted sheet with hands that have held worse things than fabric. The tremor in her left hand comes at 8:23 a.m., a small flutter in her fingers as she's completing the morning charting. She keeps the hand in motion, reaching for her badge, adjusting her stethoscope, anything to keep it busy. The tremor passes. It always does. Adrenaline memory, the neurologist called it 3 years ago, when she finally submitted to the VA screening process under her cover identity. The body remembering operations that the mind isn't supposed to discuss. She files the tremor away and continues working. Dr. Hargrove arrives at 9:15 a.m. in the way certain men arrive anywhere, as if his presence is a correction to the universe's previous mistakes. His 51 Yale Medical School, silver hair that costs $200 every 6 weeks to maintain, and he carries himself with the posture of a man who has never once considered that he might be wrong about something. His white coat is immaculate. His shoes are polished to a mirror shine. He walks into Valley Memorial every morning like a surgeon walking into his own operating room, and everyone who sees him understands instinctively that he believes this to be literally true. Katie is reviewing the 72-hour medication administration record when he appears. She doesn't look up immediately, finishing her notation, the kind of deliberate, unhurried movement that civilians read as composure and that military observers recognize as threat assessment. When she does look up, her expression is neutral, the voice deferential but not servile. "Good morning, Dr. Hargrove. Room 347 is stable, all overnight parameters normal, patient tolerating tube feeding without residual." Hargrove's eyes move across her face like a scanner searching for a weakness. What he's looking for and what he finds are two different things. He's looking for the nervous energy that comes with inexperience. What he finds is something else entirely, a composure that doesn't come from lack of experience. It comes from having experienced too much. His jaw tightens. Just slightly. "Miss Rodriguez, you've been here what, 3 hours?" 2 hours and 47 minutes, Katie says. Since 6:43 a.m. The precision irritates him. He's designed his entire hierarchy on the assumption that nurses wouldn't know their own schedule's exact start time, much less be aware of it down to the minute. "I'll be conducting rounds in room 347 at 10 a.m. Make sure everything is pristine. I don't appreciate sloppy preparation." He doesn't wait for a response. He turns and walks toward the medication dispensary, his shoes making precise clicking sounds against the tile floor, the audio signature of a man who has always been obeyed. Katie makes a note in the chart, Dr. Hargrove rounds 10 a.m., and continues her work without any visible reaction. Medic to surgeon doesn't sound like a demotion, she thinks. Just a different kind of rank. But Hargrove is already moving through the unit, and she can sense him cataloging everything like a man preparing an inventory of failures. He stops to correct a nursing student about forangle. He loudly questions why a patient is on a particular antibiotic. He spends 7 minutes in the chart room doing something with printer settings that apparently matters a great deal to him. The whisper comes from Braden, the respiratory therapist, when he arrives to check the ventilator in room 345. New doctor's mood today, or just his baseline personality disorder? Braden is 34, 5 combat tours with 82nd Airborne, and he's developed the specific kind of radar that lets him recognize other people with security clearances. He hasn't said anything to Katie directly, but his eyes spend a half-second longer on her than they should. Not suspicious. Assessing. Katie almost smiles. Probably both, she says. "Tell me about James Vance. What's his story, if you know it?" Braden checks the ventilator settings, the way the machines breathe for the people who can't breathe for themselves. Bagram medical evacuation 8 months ago. IED hit his convoy. He was the only survivor. His whole fire team died in the vehicle. He got pulled out by a combat medic from 5th Group, and by all accounts that medic did everything right. James lived. Everyone else in that vehicle died. Braden pauses. And 8 months later, James still hasn't said a word. Doctors say it's psychological. I think doctors say that when they run out of actual answers. Katie absorbs this the way she absorbs all new intelligence, processing, filing, integrating it with the pattern she already carries. AIED. A fire team. A survivor with survivor's guilt and 8 months of silence. And she's been sent to monitor his medical records because somewhere in Valley Memorial, someone has been tampering with the charts of veterans, and 3 of them died from complications that shouldn't have existed if their medical histories were accurate. By 9:52 a.m., room 347 is clinical-grade sterile. The bed is fresh, the equipment is arranged according to hospital protocol, the monitors are displaying clean readings, and James Vance lies motionless beneath clean sheets, his eyes still fixed on something on the ceiling that only he can see. Katie has checked every monitoring parameter twice. She's verified medication administration, dressing integrity, for patency, and the subtle details that separate competent nursing from the kind of nursing that catches things other people miss. Dr. Hargrove enters at exactly 10 a.m., moving with the particular intensity of a man who has decided to make something into proof of his own importance. "Let's see what we have," he says to no one in particular, directing his words at the monitors and the equipment and the patient, but not at Katie, as if she's become part of the furniture he's designed to ignore. He adjusts the bed to examine the shoulder wound, his movement smooth and professional and entirely correct. He reviews the vitals on the monitor, the same clean readings that have been holding steady for 72 hours. He looks at the chart, scanning the notes with the speed of someone who has already decided what he's going to find. Then he looks up at Katie for the first time since entering the room. "Your vital sign notation here," he says, pointing at her 6:47 a.m. entry. "You have systolic pressure at 118. Diastolic at 71. Pulse 68. He pauses, letting the silence generate the particular flavor of accusation he prefers. "I've been reading this patient's chart for 8 months, Miss Rodriguez. His baseline systolic runs 124. Your reading is 7 points below baseline. That suggests either sloppy technique or," he stops, choosing his next words with the care of someone selecting which weapon to use. "Well, some people are just born mediocre, Miss Rodriguez, and no amount of ambition changes that." Katie has heard this before. Not from Hargrove, but from other people in other places, people who read one number and built entire narratives around it, people who confuse being aggressive with being right. She doesn't defend herself. Defending yourself requires explaining that she manually took his blood pressure twice and cross-checked it with the automatic cuff, that the variation within 7 points is normal physiologic fluctuation, that she knows more about blood pressure readings than Hargrove will know in his remaining lifetime. But explaining would be insubordination in his language, and she hasn't been here long enough for that yet. Instead, she nods. "I'll watch his parameters more carefully, Dr. Hargrove." He turns back to James Vance, and Katie sees something cross his face, not quite satisfaction, but something close. The knowledge that he's established the hierarchy. The understanding that she's accepted her place in it. He makes notes in the chart, precise notations about nothing in particular, the kind of documentation that exists only to prove documentation exists. When he leaves, he doesn't acknowledge her again. The room falls quiet except for the monitors, their soft electronic breathing, the sound of machines keeping people alive while the world decides what they're worth. Katie pulls a fresh glove and adjusts James Vance's for line, her movements precise, her hand steady now, the tremor gone because she's working, and working is what her hands know how to do. She thinks about the 8 months of silence. She thinks about Braden saying the combat medic did everything right. She thinks about 3 veterans with tampered medical records and 1 Navy hospital with something wrong in its machinery. She has no idea what was about to happen. Room 347 smells like antiseptic and fear. Katie is checking vitals when the door swings open hard enough to hit the wall, Dr. Hargrove, clipboard in one hand, the other already pointing. The commander sits in the corner chair. His jaw tightens. Katie's hands are steady on the blood pressure cuff. She knows what's coming. "Miss Rodriguez," Hargrove's voice carries the weight of a man used to rooms listening. Perhaps you'd like to explain to everyone why you documented a heart rate of 68 when any competent nurse can see it's clearly 72. He taps the monitor with his pen. Tap. Tap. The sound cuts through the room like a metronome counting down something. Katie doesn't look at him. She finishes recording the reading in the chart. One measured breath. In. Out. The reading was 68 when I charted it 30 minutes ago, she says. Her voice sits flat, professional, a blade wrapped in velvet. Hearts tend to fluctuate. Hargrove's smirk widens. He turns to the commander like they're in on the same joke together. That's what we call a learning opportunity, gentlemen. Nurse Nightingale here thinks vital signs work on a delay. He laughs. No one else does. The sound dies in the room like something shot from the sky. You might consider reviewing the fundamentals during your next shift, Miss Rodriguez. We maintain standards at Valley Memorial. He leaves. Door closes softer than it opened. Katie stands motionless for 3 seconds, then 4. A single tear forms at the corner of her right eye, not from pain. From pressure. From 18 months of holding a cover so tight it's become a second skeleton. She wipes it with the back of her hand without breaking eye contact with the monitor. The commander watches her the entire time, watching and not understanding, the way people watch things they're afraid of. Your son's oxygen saturation is stable, Katie says to him, and her voice has already changed back. We'll check him again in 1 hour. The break room the next day is fluorescent bright and smells like burned coffee and microwaved fish from someone's lunch 3 hours ago. Katie walks in with her insulated lunch bag at 12:47 p.m. The room has 6 people in it, 2 residents, a surgical tech named Morrison, an ICU nurse named Chen, and 2 others she doesn't know well. She pulls a chair from the center table and sits. Opens her lunch. A turkey sandwich wrapped in foil, apple slices, water bottle. The silence hits like a pressure change. Chen stands first. Gathers her tray. The 2 residents follow, not looking at Katie, moving like they're following a script they didn't memorize. Morrison hesitates for half a second. Katie sees it, the moment of choice, the split second where he might stay. He doesn't. His shoes make small squeaking sounds on the tile as he leaves. The surgical tech goes next. One of the unknowns lingers just long enough to whisper something to Morrison in the hallway. Katie hears it, Hargrove's pet. The words are quiet enough to plausibly deny, loud enough to guarantee she heard them. She sits alone at the table. Eats her sandwich. Doesn't look up. The fluorescent lights buzz their mechanical song. Somewhere down the hallway, a monitor beeps in steady rhythm, the sound of someone's heart still beating. She drinks the water. Finishes the apple. Folds the foil carefully. By the time she leaves, 23 minutes have passed and no one has returned. That evening, she finds a note taped to her locker. Yellow sticky note, blue pen, the handwriting deliberately formal. Please review hospital chain of command policy, available in break room. No signature. She doesn't need one. The pattern builds like a fever. By Friday, there's a formal write-up on the unit board, her name highlighted in yellow marker. Failure to defer to attending physicians during rounds. Persistent insubordination. Failure to follow established chain of command. Her name stands out like a target. The other nurses pass it, read it, look away quickly when she enters the room. It's a warning painted on the wall, stay away from this one. Hargrove files 3 separate performance review requests with HR. Each one cherry-picks something minor, a medication timestamp for minutes off, a break logged 3 minutes late, a vital sign documented before the official check-in window closed. He builds the paper trail like masonry, brick by brick, each one deliberately placed. In a staff meeting on Wednesday, he mentions casually, while staring directly at Katie, that some nurses simply lack the temperament for critical care, and it's important we identify those individuals early before they cause real harm. Katie sits 3 chairs away. She doesn't react. Her hands fold on the table in front of her, scarred hands that have tied off severed arteries and held pressure on wounds that would have killed men in the field. Those hands are steady now. They're always steady. But something shifts inside her chest. A pressure. A weight. Not fear, or fear is for people who have options. By Thursday, the work itself changes. Katie is reassigned from room 347 during the day shift, moved to the overflow wing on the 4th floor, a 6-bed section where the patients are post-recovery, stable, barely requiring critical care attention. The commander's son is left with rotating nurses who don't know his baseline, who don't know that his oxygen saturation dips to 91 during rapid eye movement sleep, who don't know that his swallowing reflex has been slightly delayed for the last 48 hours. Katie notices it. Documents it. Tries to escalate to Dr. Patricia Chen, the chief of surgery and Hargrove's former mentor. Chen is at a surgical conference in San Francisco. Won't be back until Monday. Hargrove blocks every attempt to contact her. She walks past room 347 on her break and sees the new posted memo. Typed. Official. Posted by Hargrove himself. All critical care decisions for room 347 must be pre-approved by Dr. Hargrove effective immediately. The memo is dated this morning. The font is 12-point Times New Roman. It's the kind of decision that gets people killed. That afternoon, Katie sits in a conference room across from the HR director, a woman named Patricia Kim with kind eyes and the posture of someone trained never to take sides. Hargrove is there with a 3-inch binder. He opens it slowly, professionally, the way a prosecutor might open evidence at trial. Printed emails. Highlighted policy sections. Witness statements from nurses saying Katie routinely bypasses attending physician approval. The statements are signed. They're also lies, written by people too afraid of Hargrove to say no. We have a pattern here, Hargrove says. His voice is calm. Professional. This is the tone of a man who has won before and sees no reason why today should be different. And we have to consider patient safety first. Katie sits with her hands folded. She listens to each accusation without defending herself. The HR director takes notes. When they're done, the director looks at Katie with an expression that might be sympathy if she allowed herself to feel it. Do you want to respond to any of these claims? Patricia Kim asks. Katie takes one measured breath. Her voice comes out quiet, each word placed like a soldier in formation. I became a nurse to save lives, Dr. Hargrove. Not to protect egos. The room goes absolutely still. Hargrove's face flushes, not red, something darker, something that suggests rage kept on a very short leash. He closes the binder. Stands. That attitude is exactly the problem, Miss Rodriguez. He leaves. Patricia Kim sits there for another 5 seconds, then slides a form across the table. This is a performance improvement plan, she says. You have 30 days to demonstrate compliance with chain of command protocols. Katie takes the form. Reads it. Signs it. The pen moves across the paper with the same steadiness her hands use in the field, the same precision that guided needlework through tissue in a collapsing field hospital 8 years ago, when the world was ending in real time and the only thing that mattered was the next stitch, the next breath, the next heartbeat. She thinks about the commander's son, deteriorating upstairs. She thinks about 3 veterans with tampered medical records and 1 Navy hospital with something wrong in its machinery. She thinks about Captain Halloway, who trained her on tactical medicine, who died in Bagram when a mortar landed 6 feet from the field station, and she stood in the blast radius and kept working because the alternative was letting him die alone. She wonders if the commander's son is going to die alone too. That evening, before leaving, she stops by her locker. Opens it. The trauma shears sit on the shelf in the back, hidden behind her spare stethoscope. The ones with her call sign engraved on the handle. Valkyrie. 3 letters that mean more than 18 months of a cover identity, more than every nurse who whispered about her, more than Hargrove's entire career. She closes the locker quietly. Locks it. walks out through the ER entrance where rain hammers the glass like something trying to break through, and she passes the unit board one final time. Her name, still highlighted in yellow. Still a warning. Still a target. But targets move. Targets survive. Targets come back with reinforcements. Dr. Hargrove moved through Valley Memorial like a man conducting a symphony of bureaucratic precision. His office, mahogany desk, medical school diploma from Johns Hopkins framed at eye level, leather chair that cost more than most nurses earned in a month, had become a war room. Katie Rodriguez didn't know it yet, but she was already surrounded. The walls were closing. Not quickly. Strategically. He drafted the first formal complaint on a Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m., before Katie arrived for her shift. The document was a masterpiece of institutional language. Katie routinely fails to defer to attending physicians, demonstrates concerning patterns of independent clinical judgment, and creates an environment of hierarchical confusion that compromises patient safety. Every phrase had been calibrated. Every word chosen for its ability to lodge in an administrator's mind like shrapnel. He sees it the risk management director, the chief nursing officer, and the hospital's legal counsel. Not an accusation. A pattern. Not a complaint. A documented safety concern. He sent it at 7:03 a.m. with a follow-up email. I felt obligated to escalate this given recent incidents. Happy to discuss further. The use of obligated was perfect. It made him sound reluctant. Dutiful. Like a man being forced to report a subordinate's incompetence rather than a man systematically building a termination file. By noon, the email had been flagged in 3 separate administrative systems. The performance review arrived on Katie's desk the following Monday morning. Scheduled for Wednesday at 2 p.m. Her hands didn't shake when she opened it. She'd been trained to absorb threats without visible response, but something in her chest tightened like a fist. The review document was 12 pages long. Most of it focused on what should have been routine clinical work, a charting entry submitted 42 minutes after shift end on March 14. A vital sign notation that had been entered at 14:37 instead of 14:35. A patient assessment completed at 23:18 when the standard protocol called for 23:15. Each delay was minor. Each one, when isolated and highlighted in bold, looked like incompetence. Like negligence. Like a pattern. Dr. Hargrove had cross-referenced every single minor scheduling inconsistency in her file going back for months. The document read like a prosecutor's opening statement. It wasn't about medicine. It was about control. Katie sat in the break room during her lunch, the only time anyone else briefly occupied the space before scattering, and read through the 12 pages twice. She didn't need to speak to anyone. She didn't need to defend herself. She understood exactly what was happening. This was what institutional power looked like when wielded by someone competent. Not shouting. Documentation. Not accusations. Patterns. Not anger. Process. She tucked the review back into the envelope and returned to work. The hospital's board connections ran deeper than most staff realized. Dr. Hargrove had graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School in 1987, the same year as Dr. Patricia Chen, now the Chief Medical Officer at Seattle General, and Dr. Marcus Webb, who sat on Valley Memorial's hospital board and controlled physician credentialing. Dr. Hargrove made a single phone call Wednesday morning. Not a complaint. A professional conversation between colleagues. "Marcus, I hate to bother you, but I'm in a difficult position," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone burdened by responsibility. "We have a new ICU nurse, Rodriguez, and I'm starting to see some concerning patterns. Nothing I can point to definitively, but her clinical judgment seems questionable. Her charting is inconsistent. And frankly, I'm not sure her credentials align with ICU-level practice. I was wondering if you could pull her file, just to verify she's actually qualified for the level of patient acuity we manage here." It was a masterwork of insinuation. By the end of the call, Dr. Webb had made a note to have the credentialing committee do a routine audit of Katie's licensure. Not an investigation. A routine review. Within 48 hours, a formal request would be sent to the Oregon Board of Nursing asking for verification of Katie's current license status, credentials, and any reported incidents. Katie didn't know about this yet. She would find out when the hospital's HR department called her into their office. The formal write-up was printed on Thursday morning and posted on the unit bulletin board at precisely 7:15 a.m., before the day's shift arrived. It was laminated, a professional touch that made it seem authoritative, and posted directly next to the patient assignment sheet, where every staff member had to look at least once during their shift. Formal Performance Improvement Notice, the header read in bold 16-point font. The document detailed Katie's insubordination and failure to follow chain of command, her pattern of questioning physician judgment, and her inability to work collaboratively within the established hospital hierarchy. The language was surgical, precise, and utterly devastating in its permanence. Not a conversation. A posting. Not a private coaching. Public notice. The document was signed by Dr. Hargrove and countersigned by the chief nursing officer, a woman Katie had spoken to exactly 3 times and who clearly hadn't bothered to investigate before authorizing the formal notice. It cited specific incidents, Katie's suggestion during rounds about the patient's aspiration risk, her question about medication timing, her attempt to assess the patient's respiratory status. Each incident, when stripped of context and presented as questioning physician judgment, looked like insubordination. The notice concluded with a clear warning: continued failure to follow chain of command and respect hierarchical authority will result in further disciplinary action up to and including termination of employment. Katie read it the same way she'd read the performance review. Twice. Then she returned to work. Her vital signs remained steady. Her hands remained still. Her face remained composed. But in the back of her mind, the part that had trained for 18 years to recognize threats, something shifted. This wasn't bullying anymore. This was structural. This was institutional power being deployed with surgical precision. Dr. Hargrove wasn't just trying to humiliate her. He was building a permanent record of her incompetence. A paper trail that would hold up in any employment hearing, any lawyer's review, any external audit. The other nurses had seen the posting by 8:30 a.m. The break room went quiet when Katie entered that afternoon. The kind of quiet that comes when people are suddenly aware they're in the presence of someone officially marked as unreliable. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody spoke. By 9 a.m., 3 nurses had requested assignment changes to different units. But that wasn't the worst part. At 11 a.m., Katie was called to a meeting with Dr. Hargrove, the chief nursing officer, and the hospital's HR director. The 3 of them sat across from her in a small administrative conference room that smelled like stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Dr. Hargrove spoke first, his voice carrying the same regretful tone he'd used with the board member. "Nurse Rodriguez, we've compiled significant documentation regarding your performance," he began, opening a 3-inch binder that appeared to contain nothing but copies of her previous incidents. "We have real concerns about your ability to function within our unit's culture. Your pattern of questioning physician authority is creating friction. The formal notice is official. What happens next depends on your willingness to demonstrate improvement." The HR director slid a document across the table. Katie's eyes moved across the page, not reading every word, just scanning for the critical phrases. Performance Improvement Plan. 30-day probationary review. Specific metrics to demonstrate compliance. It was a contract that essentially asked her to stop trusting her clinical instincts and accept whatever Dr. Hargrove decided without question. "Do you understand?" the HR director asked. Katie's voice came out steady. "I understand." "Good," Dr. Hargrove said, and something in his expression shifted, just slightly, like a hunter watching wounded prey accept the cage. "We'll review your progress in 30 days. She was excused from the meeting. No opportunity to defend herself. No chance to explain the clinical reasoning behind her assessments. No conversation about patient safety. Just the formal notification that she was officially on notice, her career hanging by a thread, her credibility shattered across the institution. The evening was dark when she left Valley Memorial. Rain had started falling around 5 p.m. and hadn't stopped. The kind of rain that erases visibility. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 40 minutes, staring at the lit windows of the ICU, her hands gripping the steering wheel. In room 347, her patient was lying motionless. She'd been reassigned that afternoon, a courtesy notification from the chief nursing officer informing her that in light of current circumstances, it would be best if other staff managed room 347 going forward. No official reason given. No conversation about clinical continuity. Just the patient moved to another nurse's assignment list. The tremor in her left hand started again. Small at first. Then stronger. She gripped the wheel tighter until her knuckles went white, trying to force the tremor to stop through sheer will. It didn't work. The tremor, that old friend from Bagram, that physical manifestation of bodies she couldn't save, continued its rhythmic reminder that some fights couldn't be won from inside the cage. Her phone buzzed at 3:07 a.m. A text from Rivera, one of the night shift nurses who hadn't completely abandoned her patient in 347. Respiratory distress. Hargrove called in, but he's 20 minutes out. Thought you should know. Katie's thumb hovered over the phone. She was reassigned. She was officially off that patient. She was on probation. Her career was fragile enough that one more incident could end it permanently. Everything logical told her to ignore the text. To let the hierarchy function as it was designed to function. But the patient was in distress. That was all she needed to know. The reassignment order was typed on hospital letterhead, clinical and final. Dr. Hargrove had made his move with the precision of someone who understood institutional leverage. Katie was no longer permitted direct care of room 347. Only himself and his surgical team. Observation only. If she entered that room without authorization, it would constitute insubordination on a documented improvement plan, and insubordination meant termination. She read the memo at 18:47 hours, standing in the break room while other nurses pretended not to watch. The paper felt thin in her hands, thinner than it should have been. She folded it once, placed it in her locker, and clocked back in for the graveyard shift without comment. The ICU at night moved differently than daytime. Fewer voices. Fewer witnesses. The fluorescent lights hummed their electric song, and the monitors created a symphony of steady beeping, each patient's rhythm intersecting with 3 others, a choreography of human survival. Katie moved through the corridors like someone who knew every shadow, every intersection, every camera angle. 15 years of moving through hostile terrain had taught her how to navigate physical space with the precision of water finding cracks. Room 347 was dark except for the glow of monitors and the pale moonlight pressing through the window. The commander's son lay in the bed, machines breathing for him, feeding him, keeping time. His name was Michael Jr. 24 years old. Former Marine. He'd survived the ambush that killed 12 of his platoon mates, survived the flight to Bagram, survived the surgery that saved his life but didn't save his voice. 8 months of silence. 8 months of watching his father's face every morning, knowing he was a burden to a man trained to bear weight, not carry grief. Katie checked the monitors from the doorway first. Heart rate stable. Blood pressure acceptable. Oxygen saturation at 96%. Then she stepped inside because the observation felt wrong, something in the rhythm of his breathing, a slight hesitation between the ventilator's mechanical push and his own effort. She'd learned to read bodies the way master musicians read scores, understanding what was coming 3 notes before it arrived. She was close enough to smell the antiseptic coating his skin when it happened. His body went rigid. The ventilator's alarm didn't trigger because the problem wasn't mechanical, it was biological. His airway. Aspiration. Vomit, the color of rust, blocked his trachea, and his oxygen saturation dropped like a falling stone, 96 to 88 to 79. The monitor screamed. The night nurse, a good nurse named Derek, arrived within seconds, his face already registering the cascade of crisis. Caller code, Katie said, and it wasn't a suggestion. The authority in her voice made it a command. But there was something else in that moment, something Derek would remember for the rest of his career. Katie wasn't panicked. She wasn't running. She was already moving toward her locker before the code was called, her mind already 3 steps ahead of the situation. The trauma shears were in a zippered pouch at the bottom of her locker, the same pouch they'd lived in for 15 years. The metal was cool in her palm, and she could feel the slight indentation where her call sign had been engraved, Valkyrie, in letters so small they were almost invisible. She'd never worn them visibly. Never mentioned them. But muscle memory didn't recognize discretion. Her hands moved on their own. Room 347 again. Derek already had the suction running, trying to clear the airway, but it was too deep, too complete. Oxygen saturation at 72 and dropping. The code team was 6 minutes out. The commander's son's skin was turning the color of stormy water, and his lungs weren't moving anymore, just the machine's mechanical rhythm, pushing air that had nowhere to go. Katie's hands were steady as surgical lasers as she positioned him. The anatomy was there, the thyroid gland, the cricoid cartilage, the space between them approximately 10 millimeters of tissue and possibility. She'd done this 43 times in field conditions, under fire, with equipment that barely qualified as equipment. This was a hospital room. This had proper light. The first cut was clean. Muscle memory took over. The second cut opened the cricothyroid membrane, and the sound was like a sudden exhalation, the hiss of air escaping as pressure released. She'd prepared a makeshift airway from a number 6 endotracheal tube and some supplemental oxygen tubing, something she'd assembled in her mind during those 6 minutes of watching this young man's color shift toward death. The tube slipped into place. His chest rose. The ventilator connected. And somewhere in the space between one breath and the next, his oxygen saturation began climbing. 80. 85. 90. 94. She held pressure on the wound with a sterile gauze pad, her other hand steady on his shoulder, and she whispered words that belonged to a place he might understand. Stay with me. Just like Bagram. Stay with me. His eyes opened then, and for the first time in 8 months, there was recognition in them. There was a person looking back. The code team arrived 2 minutes later and took over with the smooth efficiency of professionals. Katie stepped back into the shadows at the edge of the room, and nobody asked her what she was doing there. Nobody asked how an observation-only nurse happened to be holding a compress on a freshly sutured cricothyrotomy. The crisis had clarity that protocol didn't. But Dr. Hargrove arrived 20 minutes later, and he understood immediately what had happened. He didn't check the patient's vitals. He didn't verify the airway placement or assess the closure. He pulled out his phone and began photographing the shears on the instrument tray where Katie had left them, the blood on her scrubs, the makeshift airway setup, the patient's wound. His face was the expression of a man who'd been given exactly what he needed. Code the incident report for an authorized procedure by non-physician staff, he said to Derek, his voice smooth and bureaucratic. Note the scope violation. Note the equipment. He photographed the trauma shears again, close enough to see the engraving, though he didn't acknowledge it. Get me a copy of the vital signs from the past hour. Everything. Katie was still in the room. She didn't leave. She held her ground with the same composure she'd held through IED strikes and sniper fire and the slow, crushing weight of losing people she couldn't save. She watched Dr. Hargrove document her heroism as if it were a crime, and she understood that this was always how it worked. Competence in institutions was threatening. Competence that operated outside the hierarchy was dangerous. The administrative office at 0700 hours was cold and fluorescent. 2 HR witnesses sat across the desk like judges at a tribunal. Dr. Hargrove opened his 3-inch binder, and each page was a carefully constructed argument, incident report, scope of practice violation, formal complaint to risk management, photographic evidence, legal citations from Oregon Nurse Practice Act Section 851.047. Miss Rodriguez, he said, and his voice was the tone of a man delivering a eulogy, your reckless actions endangered a patient's life and violated every protocol we maintain at Valley Memorial. the decision has been made at the administrative level. Effective immediately, you're terminated for cause. He slid a termination letter across the desk, and it might as well have been an execution order. Security will escort you from the building. Katie sat in that chair in bloody scrubs that had belonged to a life she could no longer claim. The patient she'd saved was breathing. His oxygen saturation was 94. His airway was patent. His color had returned from blue to pink. And in the sterile logic of institutional medicine, none of that mattered because she'd violated scope and protocol. She took one measured breath. The kind of breath that came before impossible choices, before the sound of helicopters departing without you. She looked at Dr. Hargrove directly, held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, and said nothing. Her silence was more eloquent than any defense could be. The cardboard box was what made it real. Her belongings fit into something the size of a small printer, the cracked mug that read "World's Okayest Nurse," a dying succulent that nobody had watered since she'd been reassigned, a photo of her spotter, Marcus, whose body had never left Bagram because there hadn't been enough left of him to bring home. Security walked her to the parking lot. The Portland rain was the kind that fell like an accusation, heavy and relentless. The bus stop at 18th and Morrison was empty at 0830 hours. She sat on the concrete bench and held the box, and the question that came wasn't anger or fear. It was simpler and more devastating. Had she just thrown away everything for someone else's life, the same way she'd done 43 times before? How many times could a person make that choice and still have anything left? 3 days passed like that, in a narrow hotel room and a rain that didn't stop, checking her phone for a call that didn't come, understanding that she couldn't call anyone because her assignment was still classified, her presence at Valley Memorial still an active investigation into medical records tampering, still a federal operation that required her silence. Then on the afternoon of the 4th day, a helicopter shadow passed over the city like a prophecy. The sound came first, rotors cutting through Portland air with the particular authority of a military transport. A UH-60M Black Hawk, the kind that didn't usually arrive at civilian hospitals unless something had shifted in the universe. Katie heard it from her hotel room. She didn't move at first, but muscle memory, that ancient thing that lived in bone and blood, recognized that sound the way a dog recognizes a whistle. She was at the hospital because something told her to be, or because she couldn't stay away, or because she'd learned long ago that proximity to crisis was sometimes the only thing that made sense. The ICU corridor seemed to expand and contract as she entered, the fluorescent light suddenly too bright, too aware. Boots on tile. That was the first thing she heard, not the running, but the methodical advance of men moving in formation. 1, 2, 3, 4. Commander Michael Vance moved down the hallway with the presence of someone whose authority had been tested against the worst the world could offer and had not been diminished by it. Behind him, a 2-star general in full dress uniform. 2 military police with the bearing of men who'd protected classified operations. The commander's face was the color of controlled anger, the kind that had been sharpened and weaponized through careful thought. Dr. Hargrove emerged from a patient room, his expression confident, ready to explain the dangerous nurse he'd terminated. He was already forming his justification when the commander's son, who hadn't spoken in 8 months and hadn't been expected to speak again, sat upright in his hospital bed and spoke a single word that shattered the fluorescent quiet. Valkyrie. The monitors continued their steady beeping. The ventilator hissed. The world, for exactly 1 second, didn't move. A hospital security guard named Ortiz, who'd done a tour in Kandahar and knew the weight of names that meant something other than their letters, stepped forward. His voice was formal and precise. That Senior Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, sir. Dr. Hargrove's face went the color of chalk. The general opened a leather-bound folder, his voice carrying the authority of someone reading into the official record of history. Senior Chief Katie Rodriguez, Special Forces, 3 Bronze Stars for Valor under fire. He paused. The weight of each medal hung in the air. Silver Star for leadership under direct enemy engagement. Another pause. Navy Cross for evacuating 17 wounded soldiers from a collapsing field hospital in Bagram under sustained direct fire. The general looked up. Her trauma shears were issued after she performed 43 field surgeries without losing a single patient. The silence lasted 120 seconds. No one moved. No one breathed. The nurses froze mid-step. The resident stared open-mouthed. The monitors continued their rhythm, the only voice in a room that had learned the cost of judgment. The commander stepped forward, his voice quiet and cutting through the stillness like a blade. She was here watching over my son because she saved his entire platoon when their convoy was ambushed outside Bagram, and I requested her specifically because 15 doctors gave up on him. He looked directly at Dr. Hargrove. And she saved his life 3 days ago when your protocols would have let him die. The incident report was 47 pages. Dr. Hargrove had spent the entire night compiling it, each word a precisely sharpened blade. Unauthorized surgical procedure. Scope of practice violation. Patient endangerment. He'd highlighted the exact statute, Oregon Nurse Practice Act Section 851.047, and attached it with the satisfaction of a man who'd finally built his case. The cricothyrotomy was indefensible. A nurse with trauma shears, cutting through a patient's throat. Even if the patient had lived, even if the airway had been patent and the bleeding controlled, the act itself was the crime. He'd photographed the scene the moment he arrived, the shears on the bedside table, the blood on Katie's gloved hands, the patient gasping oxygen through an emergency airway she had no legal authority to create. By 6 a.m., the 3-inch binder was on the risk management director's desk. Hargrove had color-coded the sections, red for protocol violations, blue for witness statements, yellow for prior incidents of insubordination. He'd been meticulous. He always was. The director, a woman named Patricia who answered to the hospital administrator, flipped through the first 10 pages and nodded slowly. This was airtight. This was career termination. This was a lawsuit prevented by swift action. Hargrove watched her read, his jaw set with the grim satisfaction of a man who'd finally removed the threat to his dominance. I've been documenting her deficiencies for 3 months, he told Patricia, sitting across from her desk in the early morning quiet. This was inevitable. Katie was called to the administrator's office at 7:15 a.m. She hadn't slept. She'd spent the night in the break room going through the incident reports Hargrove had filed, her hand steady but her mind running calculations. How many of the allegations were actionable? How many were subjective interpretations of her clinical judgment? How many would hold up to legal scrutiny? She already knew the answer. In a hospital, perception was precedent. If the chief physician said you'd violated scope of practice, you'd violated scope of practice. The evidence mattered less than the narrative, and Hargrove had spent months crafting his. The administrator, a man named David Chen with gray at his temples and the careful expression of someone trained in risk mitigation, didn't make eye contact when she entered. That was the tell. Senior Chief, he stopped himself. Ms. Rodriguez. We've made the difficult decision to terminate your employment effective immediately. You'll receive your final paycheck by Friday. Security will escort you to collect your personal items from your locker. Katie didn't move. Didn't speak. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds, long enough for David to become uncomfortable, long enough for him to explain himself defensively. The procedure you performed, even though the outcome was successful, falls outside the scope of nursing practice in Oregon. Dr. Hargrove's documentation is extensive. Our legal team reviewed it. We can't retain you. His fingers drummed the desk, the only sign he'd expected her to argue. She didn't. She stood, nodded once, and turned toward the door. We'll provide a reference for future employment, David called after her, as if that were a mercy. Katie didn't acknowledge it. She walked out of the office, down the corridor that still smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee, and to the women's locker room where she'd changed into scrubs every morning for the past 6 weeks. Her locker was narrow, metal, painted institutional gray. She cleared it into a cardboard box, the cracked mug that read "World's Okayest Nurse" in faded lettering, a dying succulent that had been a housewarming gift from someone who'd tried to befriend her, a photograph in a plastic frame. The photograph showed two women in full tactical gear standing in front of a mud brick building. The one on the left was Katie, eyes dark and focused. The one on the right was Reeves, her spotter, the woman who'd had her back through 3 Bagram rotations and who hadn't made it out of the 4th. The photograph had been taken 22 days before Reeves died. Katie stared at the photo for 12 seconds. Then she placed it carefully in the box, on top of the mug and the succulent. A security guard, a young man with kind eyes who didn't meet hers, walked her to the exit. Rain hammered Portland in that early morning way that made the city feel smaller, the sky pressing down like a weight. She was still in scrubs. She'd forgotten to change. The cardboard box was already damp. She didn't change before leaving. She just walked, the box clutched against her chest, to the bus stop 3 blocks away. The bus stop bench was soaked. She sat anyway. The box rested on her lap. Rain ran down her face and she didn't wipe it away because that would require setting down the box, and right now the box was all she had. 43 days undercover. 6 weeks of documented medical record tampering connected to 17 injured veterans, evidence that someone inside Valley Memorial's records department had been deliberately falsifying medications and dosages, evidence she was 90% certain connected to a larger VA fraud network. And it was all about to disappear. Because the moment her classified security clearance became public, the moment anyone in this hospital discovered she'd been embedded as a federal investigator, the entire operation would collapse. She'd have to pull back. The network would scatter. People who'd gotten veterans killed through deliberate negligence would walk free because she'd broken cover to save one patient. What happened next didn't just change everything, it ended careers. 3 days later, Valley Memorial's routine background audit triggered. It was a quarterly check, standard procedure, nothing unusual. But Katie Rodriguez's security clearance, classified and compartmented, appeared in the federal database cross-check system. Flags went up. Automatic inquiry. Chain of command notification. Within 6 hours, the inquiry reached the Coast Guard commander, Katie's actual assignment officer, the man who'd placed her at Valley Memorial specifically because his son was in the ICU and he'd had a grave suspicion about the medical record irregularities. The commander arrived at Valley Memorial at 2 p.m. with a 2-star general. They didn't call ahead. They simply appeared, medals catching the fluorescent lights like small accusations, moving through the hallway with the kind of authority that made administrative staff suddenly look busy. Dr. Hargrove intercepted them in the corridor, instinct telling him these were important people, hierarchy telling him they should be impressed by his title. "Gentlemen, I'm Dr. Hargrove, Chief Physician. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we had a serious breach of protocol yesterday involving a nurse who... Where is she?" The commander's voice was quiet. Not harsh. Quiet in the way that tanks sound when the engine idles, power held in reserve. "I terminated her for gross violation of scope of practice," Hargrove continued, unable to stop himself. "Unauthorized surgical intervention. I documented it extensively. She endangered." "Room 347, the general said to the aide behind him. The aide moved immediately. The commander and general walked past Hargrove without another word, leaving him standing in the corridor, his explanation unfinished, his authority suddenly invisible. The commander's son lay in the hospital bed, oxygen running at 2 liters, chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of someone whose airway was secure. His eyes opened when his father entered. For 8 months, he hadn't spoken. Not a word. Not a sound. Doctors had called it selective mutism, trauma-induced aphonia, a condition that might improve with psychiatric intervention or might not. 15 neurologists and psychiatrists had examined him. All had given the same prognosis: wait and see. The boy looked at his father. Then at the general. Then his eyes found the trauma shears on the sink. They were standard issue, but engraved. The call sign of Valkyrie was carved into the metal in precise letters. The boy's throat moved. His lips parted. And he spoke his first words in 234 days, "Valkyrie." The silence in the room could have been cut with those shears. A hospital security guard, a man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who'd seen actual combat, stepped forward from his position by the door. He'd been assigned to room 347 since Katie had been terminated. His name was Jackson, and he'd served with the 75th Ranger Regiment before a shoulder injury ended his career. He'd been watching the monitors, watching the boy, wondering about the nurse who'd trained him on the medical equipment. "That Senior Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, sir," he said to the commander. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The general opened a folder. His eye scanned the citation, his expression grave. When he began to read aloud, his voice filled the small room with the weight of history. Bronze Star for Valor under fire, Sanjin Valley, Helm and Province, 2014. He paused. The boy's father didn't move. Silver Star for leadership during the collapse of Forward Operating Base Shank, 2015. Another pause. The general's jaw tightened slightly. Navy Cross for heroic action recovering 14 wounded personnel from a burning field hospital in Bagram, sustaining 2 gunshot wounds in the process and refusing extraction until all patients were secured. The general lowered the folder. That was Katie Rodriguez. The commander looked at his son. His son looked back at him with eyes that had finally come back into focus. "She was here watching over you," the commander said quietly, "because she saved his entire platoon. I requested her specifically. And your doctor fired her." Dr. Hargrove didn't know about any of this yet. He was 3 floors down, in his office, checking his email. In his inbox was a video link. Subject line, "You need to see this." The link had been posted on a veteran forum, cross-shared to military medical networks, picked up by a local Portland news station. The video was 23 seconds long. It showed him in the parking lot, standing in the rain beside Katie's cardboard box, his voice loud and cruel. "Your delusions of competence nearly got my patient killed. You're done in this profession. You're done, do you understand me?" Katie stood silent, drenched, the box resting against her chest. The video's title was already trending, "Doctor Fires Decorated War Hero for Saving Patient's Life." The video had been recorded by a medical resident with a phone tucked in her pocket. By the time Hargrove clicked on it, it had been viewed 83,000 times. By that evening, 290,000. By the next morning, it had been shared on 18 medical ethics forums and picked up by national news. Hargrove's name was in every headline. His medical school photo was being pulled from the hospital's website. And sitting in a first-class cabin somewhere over the Midwest, Dr. Patricia Chen, his former mentor, the woman who'd taught him everything about surgical technique and ethics, was reading the caption under the viral video. Patricia Chen had attended Stanford Medical School with Hargrove's mother. She'd been the one who encouraged young David to apply. She'd mentored him through his first 3 years of practice. And she'd been disappointed by him every single day since, watching him turn charm into cruelty and surgical precision into a weapon against anyone who threatened his status. She'd never said anything until now. But now there was video evidence. Now there was a decorated war hero on a bus stop in the rain. Now there was a choice. She opened her laptop and began typing before the plane touched down in San Francisco. Her letter to the state medical board was scathing. "I taught Dr. Hargrove medicine, but I could not teach him decency, and I will carry that failure for the remainder of my career." She documented his pattern of bullying, his retaliation against staff who questioned his judgment, his prioritization of hierarchical control over patient care. She sent the letter to the board and copied it to Valley Memorial's administrator. Within 4 hours, it was public. Within 8 hours, the hospital was under federal investigation, not just for the medical record tampering Katie had been monitoring, but for Hargrove's systematic retaliation against nursing staff. The 3-inch binder became evidence against him instead of for him. Every documented deficiency in Katie's performance looked like retaliation when placed alongside witness statements from other nurses describing similar bullying and similar terminations. The state medical board opened an emergency ethics review. Within a week, 7 nurses testified. Within 2 weeks, Hargrove's lawyer advised him to accept immediate voluntary license revocation to avoid a formal hearing. He didn't. He fought. And the hearing lasted 12 days, each one a public disassembly of his character and competence. His wife attended the first day and never came back. By day 4, she'd filed for separation. By day 8, she'd released a statement saying she was devastated to discover the depths of my husband's cruelty and grateful to the real heroes who stood up to him. On day 12, the medical board voted unanimously to revoke his license permanently. No future reapplication. No possibility of reinstatement. Done. Hargrove sat in his emptied office at Valley Memorial, his nameplate already removed from the door, his files already boxed, and stared at his phone. The viral video was at 2.1 million views. One comment thread showed his high school yearbook photo with the caption, "Anyone surprised?" Another showed his medical school commencement picture. Another showed his wife's separation statement with 1,000 upvotes. He was 48 years old and his career was over. The hospital had terminated him after 31 years. His friends had stopped answering his calls after the state medical board's decision. His name had become a cautionary tale in medical schools across the Pacific Northwest, the man who'd tried to destroy someone better than himself and discovered that some people couldn't be destroyed. 6 months later, Katie stood in her dress uniform, the real one, the one she was finally allowed to wear in public, beside the commander's son at his Navy commissioning ceremony. The young man who couldn't speak had recited his oath with a clear, strong voice, and now he stood at attention, saluting his superior officers with tears in his eyes. Katie wore her full dress blues. Her ribbons were visible, the Navy cross at the top, exactly where it belonged. The trauma shears were mounted in a shadow box on the wall behind them, next to a plaque reading Senior Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez, Navy Cross, in honor of service. The commander approached her after the ceremony, both his hands reaching for hers. His grip was strong. His eyes were wet. 15 doctors gave up on my son. You proved them all wrong. That's all he said. That's all he needed to say. Katie squeezed his hands once, released them, and turned to his son. The young man wrapped his arms around her, the first voluntary physical contact he'd made with anyone in over a year. He held her for 11 seconds. Then he stepped back and said, very clearly, "I'm going to Pensacola. I'm going to be a pilot. I'm going to fly." Katie adjusted his dress uniform one final time, the same precise care she'd used in Bagram and in room 347. The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together, she told him. 40 miles outside Portland, in a strip mall beside a Starbucks, Dr. Hargrove booked a flea appointment at Happy Paws Animal Clinic. His nameplate read David and his title was Front Desk Associate. He earned $14 an hour. A former colleague, one of the nurses he'd once dismissed, came in to pick up her cat. She looked at him. She didn't speak. She just looked. And she walked out without acknowledgement. He watched her leave, then returned to his computer to schedule a dog grooming. That was his job now. Grooming. Fleas. Cleaning kennels. The trauma shears Katie had used to save a life were mounted in a ceremony in Portland. His diploma was in a storage unit he couldn't afford to keep. If you made it this far, you believe in the power of quiet strength. You believe that the ones we underestimate are often the ones who save us. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and comment below, have you ever been completely wrong about someone? Because I guarantee you, right now, somewhere in a hospital, a quiet person is holding it all together.